Welcome to the Reroll Multiple Martial Arts podcast, where we discuss the intersections between society, martial arts, and culture. I'm Elliot.
I'm Danny.
So, Danny, you wanted to explore the value of traditional martial arts.
I wanted to revisit a conversation that we have been, I think, referencing a lot, and it has to do with this question of are traditional martial arts dead? Are they useless? Are they non-practical in terms of contemporary conversation about martial arts, a combat-based, a sport-based setting? And I think the default conversation or the default conclusion is yes. If you spend, I would say probably like 5 minutes online or on YouTube or wherever you get your information, you'll find tons of videos and articles talking about how traditional martial arts do not have a place in contemporary combat sports or even self-defense training. And I was hoping we could talk about that. In particular, I want to explore, I was writing in my notes, like in defense of traditional martial arts as a theme. It sounds too big because I'm not really sure if I'm trying to defend them, but I am trying to ask myself to not run with the default common conclusion that traditional martial arts are useless, dead. Why waste your time? You know?
Why is it useless? Is it because of the flowery movements, too much movement, or blocking a hit would be like 2 hits or something. I don't know. Not enough bobbing and weaving like in boxing. Too much, straight line, linear path. Like what about traditional martial arts do you think other people think is useless?
The conversation about traditional martial arts comes about, for me, how I got to see that conversation develop was first, should you learn them if you want to defend yourself? That was the first question. Second, where can you see them as practically applied, as appropriately used? And people say, well, there is a place where you can see them almost every weekend, and that is in the MMA ring. And in there, you will see that traditional martial arts do not succeed. And that's where that conversation hit me. And then I started having it with other people that train. I think we've also shared it, you and I. And though I still have a couple things that I kind of think about as like acceptance. Like, for example, I started catching these almost like monthly videos of like Chinese martial art masters fighting an MMA practitioner and getting beat up, getting hurt. The MMA practitioner with less years of training was beating up these people that had 20, 30, 40 years of training.
Yeah, the YouTube channel, the martial arts journey, talks about a young man who is or was very fluent in Aikido and abandoned his initial practice to explore MMA because when he sparred with an MMA practitioner, his Aikido could not hold up. Are you talking about things like that? I mean, things like Aikido, which is, from the samurai arts, and people don't fight like samurai anymore, or, Kung Fu or certain types of Kung Fu as an umbrella term for, many different movements. Are you saying that? I mean, people saying, Tai Chi could be used as combat, but it is also a very meditative and kind of like yoga, really, for exercise. You're holding these poses.
I think that when people started questioning traditional martial arts, they were, looking at a couple things. They were looking at how effective is this thing against an opponent that is not versed in the same martial art that I practice, and more importantly, is not interested in making this easy for me. So that's the context. Then the specific traditional martial arts, I think there's a couple. The first one that you mentioned, Aikido, is a Japanese martial art. And I remember coming across Aikido. I've trained in Aikido, but mainly focusing on the traditional weapons. So the bokken and the jo. And I feel that it was weird because I really liked Aikido. I liked Aikido in the very reason, I mean, for the very reason that people will say why it doesn't work. I liked it because it looked beautiful.
I think about that. I think about the usefulness of certain things and beauty. I think there's beauty in movement. But what if the beauty of movements doesn't really apply to life? I mean, it's kind of like, why do I want to learn calligraphy when I can write with my hands regular or type on a computer? That's way more efficient. I know it might be not a best, comparison, but I don't know, Danny. Like you asked me if I was going to learn Kung Fu, am I interested? Well, with the amount of time I have during the week, I'd rather dedicate it. I can think of 4 or 5 other martial arts that I would dedicate myself to first before Kung Fu.
Well, I think that's the place that I was hoping really to focus on, because with the conversation about traditional martial arts being dead as a practice that we should invest in, I don't think they're all equally disrespected. So there is Aikido, which is a Japanese martial art. And then there's Kung Fu, which is Chinese. And I feel that there is something uniquely awkward about Kung Fu being the poster child of outdated traditional martial arts. There's even conversations that the very teachers are delusional. They're frauds. They have taken their students' time and money and even bodies. Like if I give you 20 years of my time and you teach me something that is of no value, I could argue like you robbed me, of those hours. But I feel there's something is specific here that I want to point out. I feel there's something underlying this targeting of Kung Fu, because you could argue that karate, Shotokan, is useless. You could argue that traditional Taekwondo, which is one that I also trained, or Hapkido, are useless because you don't see them in MMA. But there's something very specific, I think, about Kung Fu as it has become, I don't know if it's fair to say the scapegoat, but for sure the poster child of the critique of traditional martial arts.
Do you think it's because Kung Fu movies were such ingrained in culture, and Kung Fu was maybe put on a pedestal for so long that, decades later, people realize, wait, there are other martial arts that are potentially better? And by the same time, though, it's funny because, the things that we're talking about, the fake masters and stuff like that, Bruce Lee was talking about it in the 70s in his books. He was writing about it. Beware of, these masters or these people who say that, I can't show you because it's too dangerous. And it's just, built on fraud. Some schools are built on fraud. And even now, you see some BJJ schools and they're being exposed on the internet. So, yeah. So you think Kung Fu is disrespected because, of the movies, because people thought, they had these special powers when in fact they don't.
I'm gonna follow you on that assessment of looking at the martial art and how it has a presence in our culture, in our society, how it entered our psyche, our common knowledge of fighting. And I grew up watching kung fu movies like Saturday or Sunday on the TV. That was it. That was my fighting movie. And in the 80s, we started branching out. But for years, that was the only fighting style that we really thought was like not just talented, but it was the art you were supposed to learn. If I was a little kid, when I was a little kid, I would watch the movies. I'd go out into my backyard and I was trying to do the tiger stances, the dragon, these moves that were fictional to some degree. I think that now we know that the movies that we saw were rooted in the genre of Chinese opera. So that even the kung fu we were seeing could be argued is a fake kung fu. I'm just being very clear. Could be argued. But for sure it was entertainment kung fu. Like the way that you see Jackie Chan today.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone who does kung fu says there's a lot of skill set in what he does, but he is not doing traditional kung fu. He's doing a kung fu that is very much compatible to be filmed and put on camera and displayed and consumed as entertainment.
Absolutely.
But I think you're right. That's probably the history. I mean, think about the level of depth that kung fu has in the United States and elsewhere. So that we saw, for example, I believe there was that old film, Kung Fu, with that white dude that was playing
David Carradine, I think.
Yes, and Yellowface, which rumor has it that Bruce Lee was supposed to play that character. He pitched the idea, but because of the early Hollywood racism, they said, nope, not you. Let me put someone in Yellowface.
Wow, I didn't hear about that.
Yeah, that's what I remember reading. That was that period. Like he really pitched that. That was his role, but it got taken away from him.
Wow. So, Danny, would you, with the time that you have, would you do start training in a traditional martial art? I mean, I think we find some sort of value, but what about time, energy, and dedication? I think that's a lot. It's like when I think of kung fu, I think of young people. It's almost like Muay Thai. Young people, they go to a monastery and then they dedicate their life and become a master, and then they meditate all day.
Well, there's a couple of things that I think are hard or that we have to assess behind that question. I asked you before we started recording, like, hey, would you invest in kung fu? Would you take it? And you kind of laughed at it because it was kind of like a off the cuff question. But I asked you honestly because I have a feeling that you don't really think kung fu is a martial art that would give you the skill sets that you're looking for to defend yourself. Am I right?
And I'm Chinese, man. I mean, shouldn't I be defending it? I mean, yeah, I think it's really interesting to see this new evolution of people, seeing that, mixed martial arts is gaining a lot of popularity in China. And, it is that new versus old generation of thinking. And I feel like there's a sense of some Chinese traditionalists holding on to tradition for the sake of holding on to tradition. And there's a sense of national pride that, doesn't want to be, they don't want to rock the boat. But I think, I don't know. I'm not trying to be petty, but, if Kung Fu would evolve properly, they would be head to head with Muay Thai. I mean, it would be on an international stage, but it's not. And it's hard for me to defend it other than kung fu being good for the health, good for meditation, and for spiritual practice.
So the answer is no.
That's right. Unfortunately, unless I didn't have to work or something, I would do kung fu. But I would go back to Muay Thai, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and Judo. At least at this point in time, those are my top 3 if I was going to start training.
Is it fair to rephrase or extract a subtle subtext to your conversation by saying that you don't believe that Kung Fu has the skill sets or tools to provide you with the level of defense to use it?
Yes, because it is not generally a sparring martial art. It's a lot of hitting, bags, and there's some conditioning and a lot of practicing movements. But I'm not hitting a heavy bag. I'm not wrapping my wrists because I'm to strengthen my wrists. There's a lot of things that I don't know. It's short answer. That's right, Danny. I don't think that that it is enough to defend myself, because if I see someone training in BJJ trying to take me down, I'm sorry, but not sorry. Kung Fu is not the answer in that context.
And I want to return to why I'm posing these questions. I'm not trying to be difficult with you. I appreciate your sincerity, because I feel that that answer that you just gave is one that many of us hold right now as the default. Like, we hold a position that says, I've seen the videos and these Kung Fu practitioners are getting beat up in horrendous way. It's not even a fight. It's a horrible one-sided massacre. Like, they're getting bloodied. They're getting embarrassed, by these other people. Some of the ones that I've really have felt were unfair was when these young 20-year-old MMA artists challenged the 60-year-old sensei master. And that makes perfect sense on the movies that I used to watch. In the movies, the sensei looked like he was 100. And he would fly up into the air and beat up yes. People can't see what you're doing, but you're moving that long beard to the side, so it wouldn't get out of the way in the way of the fight. But that was even well, as an adult, I know that was fiction. As a child, no, I did believe it, Elliot. I thought there's a sensei somewhere deep in China who can beat up everyone, even though he's like 80 years old. Because that's what I thought when I was like 8.
I thought that too.
But now, as a grown man, I know that's not true. That sensei holds tremendous knowledge. And I want to say that's a walking library. Definitely. So my respect and my even not respect, appreciation and protection. I want that person to live forever. But I'm not going to fight him. It just seems unfair.
I think so. I mean, if in another life, if something happened and I had to join a monastery to train Kung Fu, I would do that. Being able to control breathing, and then therefore control heart rates, and then therefore control so much of how my body functions. And usually, these unconscious, body movements, a lot of these high-level Kung Fu guys, they can control it consciously. And I think that's absolutely amazing. It's almost clickbait. That's real. Kung Fu masters. But anyway. But do you think? So. But where do we go from here? what is how do we not solve this but work it out? Because I mean, people like, one thing is that I like Bruce Lee because I think that he is the first MMA person. He is the founder of MMA because I've talked about it before, but he saw Chinese kung fu, he trained in it, got into a few fights, and felt that his training, although was good, needed more. He needed more skill sets, and then went to look for and gained other skill sets. I mean, Jeet Kune Do arguably is another word for MMA, or what have you, right? So, so when I hear someone bashing people like Bruce Lee or people who practice under him, I think that's kind of petty and probably low key racist. But I think, but aside from that, going back to hardcore traditional stuff, I mean, where do we go from here? What value does it have in the contemporary modern martial arts landscape?
Well, first, I think that there's a space here that we can talk about, like what type of questions would you pose? And in a past conversation, I asked you to think about this question in this way. If you were starting martial arts and you were shopping around and you were asking me, hey, what should I be asking? Like, for example, like let's say you're going to buy a car. I would give you a set of questions on what you want to look for. And in terms of martial arts, I think we can ask similar questions. And I would ask you, what do you want to get out of it? And right now, just for the sake of time, I'm going to try and think about me answering those questions if you were posing them for me. And I would say, well, I want an art that uses the hands and the feet. So I want to be able to punch and kick. Then, Elliot, does Kung Fu have that? Yes or no?
Yes.
Then, Elliot, I want to be able to kick like a front snap, also like a circular roundhouse that can hit the low, medium, and top of the head. Does Kung Fu have that?
Yes.
And then if I'm in a closed position, I would like to be able to clinch and use my knees. Does Kung Fu have that?
Yeah, there are some styles that teach that. Mm-hmm.
And ideally, I want to be able to throw the person. So does Kung Fu have any techniques that sweep or throw the person over?
Depending on the style, yes.
And then finally, should we go to the floor? Does Kung Fu have any type of locks or something?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I know Bruce Lee adopted that, but I can't answer that.
And for me, that's where that one gap would work, huh? I think I would say that Kung Fu has locks from the standing position. I never trained in Kung Fu. I never took not even one class, but I've been surrounded by Kung Fu practitioners and friends. So this talk I've had, and they would get really angry at me because I would say things like, well, I'm doing karate because I like their kicks better. And it was like, we got every kick that karate has. I was like, well, do you have a Mawashigiri? Yes. Do you have a reverse Mawashigiri, which is like a reverse roundhouse? You hit with the heel. And they're like, yeah, we got that. And then they would say, we even got another one that you guys don't have, this like spinning dragon tail kick or something like that. And I was like, oh yeah, we don't have that one, Shotokan. I mean, they would always try and one-up me, So they were just like, everything you say that you want, we have. But the thing that I think is interesting, even when we went to locks, they were like, we have locks too. We got wrist locks, shoulder locks, elbow. We even have like chokes, neck chokes. but they don't do the guard. They don't drop to the floor and like, do newaza like judo does. So maybe that's one of the places that we can think about. It's missing that. But check it out. Muay Thai doesn't have that either. Muay Thai does not have a guard, does not have a choke. It doesn't have that, yet it's respected. But I think the part for me is that there's some gap between understanding what tools the martial art has and how it looks in performance. Because in performance, we seem to see MMA guys beat up Kung Fu practitioners.
I mean, yeah, because Kung Fu, right as it mostly is now, isn't a sparring sport. It's a lot of movement and health and, my opinion, meditative and exercises that are good for the body, for good blood flow, for knowing how to work your body's energy. But yeah, you can't. I don't have anything to defend Kung Fu. I honestly don't. I like it. I like the nostalgia of it. I respect the traditionalism and the cultural knowledges and the historical significance. But man, clinch, elbow, knees, Muay Thai has it. It's the toughest, man.
Let me ask you to consider this question. What would happen if MMA practitioners challenged Muay Thai and went down the list? So they challenged Muay Thai, they challenged Taekwondo, they challenged Shotokan, they challenged Aikido, although we saw that one already, what happened with Aikido. But we haven't seen the other ones. What do you think would happen?
I mean, it really depends. I mean, say, for example, Muay Thai guys aren't, trained to defend takedowns. But at the same time, though, a lot of Muay Thai guys are able to control the clinch and, certain, I don't know, BJJ stuff. But it really depends on the rules, in my opinion. And also, Joe Rogan said he is waiting for a top-level Muay Thai practitioner to enter into the UFC because he says that he hasn't seen that. I mean, Muay Thai person who additionally trains in MMA and is great. A lot of these high-level Muay Thai fighters are doing that. I think that's amazing, and that's where the money's at too. But there is one thing that it really depends on how the Kung Fu practitioner uses the moves. I do follow Master Wong, who lives in the UK, and he's not perfect. No one is, but in some of the stuff that he analyzes, he says, this Kung Fu guy who's fighting an MMA guy, this Kung Fu guy is just using the same 3 techniques over and over. Of course he's going to get beat up. He's not controlling distance. He's not, doing XYZ that would be effective. And, if someone's not using the moves correctly, then it's not going to work. Also, I think it's okay to incorporate Kung Fu moves and certain styles into someone's skill set. You see some of Anderson Silva's later fights. He does certain things, certain traditional, I guess, quote unquote traditional Jeet Kune Do moves, because Anderson Silva is a Bruce Lee fan, and so it was pretty cool to see that. And he did make those things work. I mean, the stuff he did wasn't like knockout stuff, but it was someone stuff to mess with their opponent, to just kind of quickly just disorient them.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of tool sets that Kung Fu has, and I probably sound really awkward to people because I just said I've never trained in Kung Fu, and yet I'm defending it. But the reason I defend it is I'll be transparent. I'm a huge academic nerd, geek. Like, I believe in knowledge and archiving information and not always having to justify why. So that as people are burning books, they go, well, no one's using C++ anymore. That language is dead. There's the other one, C plus pound. Throw it away, burn it. I'm the one that says, no, put it away. We're going to reference that later. There's history behind why we should like hold that knowledge. And part of me is really looking at Kung Fu in that way, that even though when I see these MMA guys challenge Kung Fu and they lose, the last one I saw was actually, I thought was a pretty fair matchup. The Kung Fu practitioner was when he was in his 40s and was heavier and taller than the MMA, who was probably again in his 20s, but probably like 50 pounds lighter. And he still lost. But the reason I know it's important to reference is that when I saw him lose, I think I was speaking like you spoke. I was like, man, that guy wasn't versed in distance. He got overwhelmed by the MMA guy rushing his distance, and he thought that in Kung Fu you have these little moments like in boxing. In boxing, I always get frustrated because I was like, yeah, they clinch, but if you clinch too much, the referee gets upset at you. Stop clinching so much. And I was like, that's a legal move, by the way, but it's not what we appreciate in boxing. In boxing, you want them to be in the pocket or outside the pocket, but don't hug each other, even though that's legally allowed. And I thought about that when I saw that. I was like, oh, this is in a ring. It's an MMA fight. The MMA fighters practice. The Kung Fu person has no clue. But I thought, give him time. Or even better, don't do that. Like, if you want to learn how to fight, tell me what you want. And I would say, I want to be able to punch someone in the face if they're trying to hurt me. Kung Fu can do that, but you have to practice it. You can't just, and I think for me, I spent so many years in what people call traditional martial arts. Like I did Shotokan, I did judo. I don't know if jiu-jitsu is a traditional martial art. I don't know if people think of it that the way, but I even did Taekwondo, for a while. I surprisingly, I left Taekwondo for a similar reason as to why Kung Fu isn't as attractive. I didn't like it. I thought it was too much sports based. It was, my friend at the time his dreams were of going to the Olympics. I don't know if he ever made it. Well, obviously I wouldn't know. He didn't make it because I would have known. I don't even know if he went to the Olympic tryouts is what I wanted to say. I just remember he was a really high level competitor, and I just didn't like it, man. Like I thought, like why is everyone fighting with their hands on the sides? Because the point system doesn't give you that many points for punching someone in the face. So we were learning our sparring really awkward. But to reference the idea of like, did it have the things that I think are useful? Yeah, it has kicks, punches, blocks, elbow strikes. So I think there's things in every martial art, but if we measure the value of martial arts by whether they can go up against an MMA fighter, I think we're going to lose out a lot.
Yeah, because more styles means, more tools. And so, you see people with a karate background, like, Machida family, or, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, Michelle Watterson, these people were versed in, karate, which a lot of people, like to poo-poo on. And that's fine. But these people expanded their skill sets, and that's what makes them, effective in their sport. So I think that's, for me, the only answer is to expand somebody's skill set. I mean,
and that's where I stand in the defense of Kung Fu. Like, I see it, and I was talking to my daughter, and she was telling me about her friend who her dad's a Kung Fu martial artist and is teaching his daughter Kung Fu. So my daughter's kind of like, well, my dad's teaching me Muay Thai and Jiu-Jitsu, and then and then she was doing a move like, oh yeah, I know what happened. So I told her, why don't you tell your friend to like join us, when we go to jiu-jitsu? And she's like, nah, she doesn't want to do that because she's learning kung fu. And I made the comment of like, kung fu, doesn't she know that that's not gonna go anywhere? I was such a jerk. And then she goes, no, she even taught me this one move, Dad. And it's the one where the pose where you kind of like have the hourglass, your knees are kind of touching.
Yeah.
And it's like a position. And then she goes like that. This is so that if they try and do a soccer kick up your legs, they, you can block it, And I was like, yeah, that kind of, I've heard that one. I was like, but what if it's just a front snap kick to the stomach? And she's like, oh, I guess it goes through. But I know that I sounded so jerky because I'm being contradictory by saying I feel that like, I know what that move is because we have it in Shotokan too. We have that stance. It's this stance where you are in this hourglass position and your knees are almost touching. And you're holding it. It's weird. You know what the move is? The stance is? You've seen it. It's in Bruce Lee's drawings where the guy is holding like this and he has his knee. That move, that's an actual stance. You train hours and hours to be able to hold it. But the point is that like I know that it works because of the way that it's supposed to ideally enhance power. So that if I push you against the wall and you are able to find some structure of composition to defend out of there, it's better than not having a structure of composition. And that's what that move is to me. It's like, it's not like you're supposed to fight from there, although some people might say you are, but I just thought about the idea that as you said, every martial art on this planet has value. And if we're going to measure its value, whether it can withstand an MMA competitor, I think we're going to lose out tremendously on the wealth of knowledge that is held.
I agree in knowledge and in places like libraries and the internet where we should, have a large collection of knowledge and information for people to reference. I think I respect all martial arts. You take a look at Zabit. Where he's from, that school, it's kung fu. But being able to use kung fu in a sparring situation and training like it's a boxing gym, it becomes very, very effective. Yeah, I forgot to talk about Zabit. You know Zabit?
Yeah, I've been following him.
Yeah, it's great.
No, I think there's a space for all of this conversation to kind of think about the respect, but I can hear people say this, like it's one thing to respect and value techniques because they have a value in recognizing the collective diversity. And it's another thing to say, I just want something that works because I don't want to archive it out of respect. I want to use it. So like even Krav Maga, which I think a lot of people kind of have their own critiques on it, I find it interesting because they're very much a newer martial art that is a composition of others. I would be curious what would happen to Krav Maga if an MMA fighter said, I challenge you, come into the ring. So I repeat my question, like this idea that we're picking on Kung Fu, I think is hiding some type of alternative discrimination. Because if we follow this line, I think it would look pretty similar. Like if you went to, I think I told you what happened to me when I trained with one of my buddies, my neighbors, who was a fighter, and I already had my black belt, I think. And he humbled me, and I was sparring every Saturday and Friday night in the dojo, and I wasn't the best, but I wasn't the worst either. I felt confident, but he was a street fighter with a little bit of Muay Thai and Eskrima background and Jiu-Jitsu. And yeah, he was in my weight class. He outweighed me for sure. And I'm making excuses. He was outside of my weight class. No, but his skill set was awesome. He fought almost every weekend without rules because he liked to fight. And I'm not that guy. In fact, the reason I felt awkward because I think it really humbled me because it put something in my head like, wow, if he really wanted to hurt me, he could, you know? And I don't know what it would have looked like if I was really trying to defend myself because I think I wouldn't have been so comfortable with like not using all the school's tool sets that were available. But I think that's the line that a lot of us are saying. Like, hey, I don't want to talk about martial arts as just being a collection of styles that the human collective has produced. I want to talk about simmering which are the three tools I'm going to use when my life is at risk.
Absolutely. And I think about, certain Kung Fu styles for close, self-defense. It's like back in the day, someone was going to grab your shirt, you do these quick moves to brush them off, and so on and so forth. So the context is very different. It's not like, different Kung Fu styles for different contexts. I mean, so yeah, I don't want to sound repetitive, but I think you wrapped it up nicely, D. I think you, I think we really just kind of, explored this whole thing, because anybody can be a keyboard warrior and talk trash. Anybody can do that, but to actually have a good conversation and just kind of like to break it down, it's not that common, So, yeah, I'm excited for the future. I'm excited, again, for the new martial artists coming out of China. People like Zhang Wei Li, Song Yadong already, are already making their mark. So, it's going to be more in places like in, Russia, Dagestan and all those places. Amazing. I'm excited. With that said, it's been the Reroll Multiple Martial Arts podcasts, where we explore the intersections of martial arts, society, and culture. Until next time, peace.
Go take a martial art class. Take Kung Fu.